Welcome to Emphasis Added, a podcast by the Houston Law Review about legal issues, prominent lawyers, and the study and practice of law. I'm Matt Shelf.
And I'm Brock Jones. We're your hosts, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to Season 4's Law School Real Talk series with the Houston Law Review, where current students and administration share their experiences and advice on how to succeed in law school and beyond. We're joined here today in this part 1 of the series with Assistant Dean for Career Development at University of Houston Law Center, Tiffany Tucker, to discuss best practices for students participating in legal recruitment through both on-campus and direct interviewing processes.
Dean Tucker joined the UHLC Career Development Office after practicing transactional, intellectual property, and general corporate law at Sullivan Cromwell in New York. As a former professional development specialist, her work with UHLC now involves overseeing employer outreach and student career counseling, facilitating the Passport to Success professional development program, managing recent graduate employment data collection and reporting, and providing one-on-one career counseling to alumni. Dean Tucker, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So law school is an expensive commitment, and the most important thing to many students is assurance that they'll get a job following graduation. As a first-generation law student, the detailed support provided by UHLC's Passport for Success professional development program was a big selling point for me as an applicant deciding on law schools. Can you tell me more about the goals and activities of this program?
Absolutely. So the Passport to Success professional development program was created in order to provide the basics for professional development behavior that students and alumni should understand and be able to exhibit in order to be successful on the job. We teach tools for identifying potential opportunities, for securing those opportunities, and in succeeding, going above and beyond, making sure that they make the best impression possible during these employment opportunities. So the program is set up now to have a mandatory component for every single level of student. Now it started out with one mandatory program, but through lots of lobbying, we have now built the program to be 4 mandatory sessions, 4 mandatory 50-minute sessions for 1Ls throughout their 1L year, 1 optional session that was requested to specifically get students ready for the type of interviewing and networking that happens during the winter break during your 1L year. And now we have mandatory programs for 2Ls and 3Ls so that they can understand how their professional development skill set should be growing and how they convey to employers that they are worth taking a chance on and investing in.
Definitely.
Awesome. So this might have even been during orientation, but I remember on day 1, U of H provided a thorough audit of our social media profiles and gave us some helpful guidance on how to use social media in positive ways. For our listeners at schools that don't emphasize social media content, how can law students moderate their social media presence?
So what we tell students when they first come into school is that it's incredibly common for potential employers as well as just attorney networking contacts to look you up, just like in the regular world, right? We often equate legal recruiting to dating. So essentially what you'd expect someone that learns about you and is planning to meet you to do, we do in the legal community. So if your school doesn't offer a social media audit, what we recommend is that any student or even potential student to go through their social media accounts, put them all on lockdown, make sure that you have to approve for someone to be able to see your page, possibly take some pictures, some quotes, take the things down that you don't feel like reflect who you are at this time as a law student. We were all different people. I went to a junior college before I went to my first undergraduate institution. I majored in partying and bringing my GPA down. I was so good at it. I was an overachiever.
Straight A's.
That was straight A's. Had social media been around then, there would be so much that I would be taking down, not only from my own page, but from my friends' pages. So we recommend that you go through all of your social media, lock it down. You go through any pages where you're tagged, and you request to be untagged if at all possible. We call this managing your digital dirt. You want to Google yourself. You want to look up your name and all the configurations that you could look it up on different social search engines to make sure nothing surprises you, nothing comes back that, looking at it with fresh eyes now as a law student, or even looking at it through the eyes of an attorney, right? Because our point of view is still different as a student. Looking at that through the eyes of a potential employer to see if you really want to keep that out there in the world. And if you have a question, just contact your career office. Heck, even contact our career office because we're happy to help talk through and walk through certain issues that may come up there. We've received questions even about information that's out there online that isn't under the control of the student. Someone else may have critique them in some kind of way, and they are concerned that someone will see that and develop a negative impression. So we walk through those situations, talk about how to best handle them. We actually don't proactively do the social media audit here because we just found too few instances of, thankfully, of our students having information online that could have been detrimental. So we provide the same training and then ask the students to just make an appointment with us if they have a question about anything. And more often than not, this catches it. So we just say, pay attention, put everything on lockdown, and then talk to someone who can look at the content in question through the eyes of a legal employer, and you'll probably be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to think about it from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So to start us off, I wanted to discuss legal employment recruitment generally, kind of in terms of communicating with law firm representatives before and throughout the application process. So how should students reach out to law firm representatives to start out?
So I love the lawyer answer. It depends. So it depends on what level of student we're talking about, 1L, 2L, 3L, 4L. If they're a part-time student, they're in their fourth year. It depends on the type of firm we're talking about, typically the size of firm. So we'll start with big law firms. Typically, big law firms have a very structured recruitment process. They have applications online. They have recruiting contact information out there. For 1Ls, the standard practice is to apply directly before we get to our OCI Session 3 for 1Ls in January. If students want to apply starting December 1st, they can. We typically recommend they wait until after finals because you have to take time away from studying to put together applications, and you need the grades for Big Law to get in there. So we recommend that students go to nalpdirectory.com, I believe is the website. So it's the NALP directory of employers who want their information all in one place for this very reason. So you, as a 1L, you can go to the NALP directory, insert the city where you'd like to work. For us, typically it's Houston, and there is a drop-down box for law firms that will hire 1Ls. So you'll go to that drop-down box, choose that, and then you'll get at this point, I believe it's around 35 to 45 employers who do recruit 1Ls in their Houston offices. And so that's where you start. In those files is the basic information for the recruiting contacts, and the standards for reaching out to law firm is very simple. You send a resume and a cover letter, you email it directly to whoever their recruiting contact is, and that's pretty much it. The ones who do have applications online, you go through their portal. You also apply there. They could also have their jobs, summer associate positions for 1Ls posted in our job bank or somewhere else on a different website. But those are the main ways. You apply directly, sending your resume and cover letter and transcript when it's released, and also apply directly through any type of application portal. That is for 1Ls, for 2Ls at the big law level, typically applying through the 2L OCI that most firms have at the end of the summer is the way to go. But more and more often, firms are opening up applications sooner than that.
Very early.
Very, very early. So we are, just like we would encourage students, if you are really focused on big law, you wouldn't want to wait, say, until bidding happens for OCI Session 3 in January. You probably want to go ahead and apply, and then also apply through our OCI program if you'd like to do that. 2Ls, like I mentioned, that's when you apply through the big OCI in the fall. And then after that, for big law, it's a little bit touch and go. If you don't get into big law early enough through their structured OCI process, then there are other ways. Typically, you work with us to do that. You're trying to get your foot in the door through networking contacts, through our connections, and every year we see a few who are placed or who secure positions in big law after the OCI structured process. Then for the rest of the employers, it varies. So for judges, if you want to do a judicial internship, then you would be sending a direct application to judges. They don't typically post their internships. Some of them do, but for the most part, you're expected just to find them, almost like big law. You're expected to find them, and then you send to them the same kind of documents, but you also include a writing sample, and then when you get your grades, you also send that. So resume, cover letter, writing sample, and then your transcript. And then for anyone else, other employers, government, public interest, smaller firms, companies, they post all throughout the year in our job bank. And we also have a brand new OCI session 4, meant to capture in the late spring anybody else who needs students, or they need to hire post-grad. So they'll be interviewing 3Ls as well. So it ranges the ways that you apply. They can be direct applications. They can be through one of our structured recruiting programs here on campus, or they can be through networking.
Good deal. Good deal. So through those structured programs or those on-campus kind of structured recruitment events, should students send their applications to attorneys in those firms aside from that, or should they try and kind of keep it one-track minded?
I love this question.
Trick
because
question.
it's a trick question, right? It depends is always the answer. So generally, attorneys appreciate when students who may have applied through a structured program or through a job posting, when they do reach out to them directly. Pre-pandemic, we didn't see it as much. There was kind of not a holiness, but there was just like an understanding of how you're supposed to respect the process, right? If you apply through OCI, then you just wait, and then if you get an interview, great. If you don't, oh well. Things changed during COVID. There weren't as many opportunities to meet students in just regular networking with regular networking opportunities. So employers were pretty much across the board were encouraging us to encourage our students to reach out directly if they had already applied, or if they plan to apply, to talk to attorneys, to just learn more about the firm. Back in the day, if you say if an OCI program was coming up, you didn't dare reach out to an attorney. It's like bad form. It was very poor form. You don't reach out because you could be trying to, I guess, get a leg up on someone else. But they welcome it now. They just really just want to get to know the students. So it is not it's not taboo like it used to be to reach out directly to attorneys. I would say more often than not, we will hear that reaching out to too many contacts at one particular firm is a bit of a faux pas. So say you've applied directly and you reach out to one, maybe two attorneys, completely fine. You reach out to 5 or 6, then there might be a concern. So keep the number low, and I would say strategize with your career counselor about which exact contacts to reach out to and how many based on the firm.
Absolutely. So with that kind of shift in the trend since the pandemic, is it appropriate for law students to network with the legal recruitment or these attorneys on LinkedIn at all?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Networking on LinkedIn is absolutely a thing. It's a lot more welcome than I think it used to be. I think a lot more people are checking their LinkedIn messages than used to be the case. Reaching out in general, as long as the substance of the text that you send is appropriate, I think you should feel comfortable reaching out to really anyone on LinkedIn. That is pretty much the purpose of LinkedIn, for professional networking. So generally, it's welcomed. We heard quite a bit, in fact, during the pandemic, that because everyone was so isolated and a little lonely, it was happening even a lot more, right? So alums that I spoke with, as well as students, were reaching out to more and more attorneys and getting excellent responses and plans to set up like Zoom coffees, or once we got out of the house, real coffees in real life. So yes, it's definitely a thing, not taboo at all.
Awesome. So I think maybe some of the reason for reaching directly out to attorneys and things is, I remember my first experience is reaching out to law firms, maybe using the email that was on NALP or so. Sometimes it feels like you're kind of sending an email into the dark. You haven't connected with this person before, and you just don't have any idea whether it was received. So is it appropriate for students to follow up with Recruitment if they don't receive an initial response to their application? Or like you said, are you just supposed to apply and then wait and hope?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so taking just a half step back, if a student reaches out to an attorney through LinkedIn, I would say I always encourage candidates to reach out through an attorney's work email if they can find it. Like if they find them on LinkedIn, but they're at a firm and that firm has a bio and an email address, I always recommend, instead of just leaving a message in LinkedIn where you don't know that they check it, leave it at work where you know they're checking it every few minutes, right? They may not be able to get back with you, but they'll still check it. So that actually is probably a more reliable way to reach out and try to connect with someone, since you know they're looking at that. When it comes to recruiters, however, the direct application process that happens in big law specifically, where with organizations where they definitely will have a recruiting team, right? It is fine, I think, to follow up to confirm that your application is received. Following up to try to push to get an interview, I would say you want to do that sparingly when it comes to big law, because the process has historically been, you apply, if you get a call, you're going to get an interview, and if you don't, then you're not, right? And that was just it. But things have changed so much. As long as you're being gracious and professional during your outreach, then it's okay to reach out several times, I think, to confirm that the application was received, and then maybe to even go a step further to ask about their timeline about interviewing, or their timeline for deciding on making recruiting decisions. I think that's okay. You will probably want to get another pair of eyes on that email just to make sure you're hitting the right tone and not coming across a little too aggressive, but just tenacious, which attorneys typically love.
Sure. And now I know we've talked about there being a couple different ways to apply. We've mentioned direct applications versus on-campus interviews. A lot of firms probably will engage in kind of both these methods, or even others. So should students utilize more than one avenue, even for the same place?
Yes. So a comprehensive job search looks like this. I came up with frank. We want to keep it frank. Are you doing a full job search? Be frank with yourself. So frank stands for following up repeatedly with these three things: applying to posted positions, utilizing your network, and cold calling. If you're doing all three of these things and then rinsing and repeating them all, then you can know that you're having a comprehensive job search going on. Now, for big law recruiting, where the organizations tend to have a more structured program recruiting cycle timeline, it can be useful to follow up in various ways. Again, just doing it sparingly and strategically. So, for example, there are several programs outside of our OCI process that big law firms use to recruit, let's just say 1Ls. We're talking about 1Ls. So there is the direct application process. There is our OCI Session 3 process that we just had last week. And but then there are other programs like the Houston Bar Association's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program. They have a 1L clerkship program. There's a minority program like Sunbelt that happens. It's for, I think, schools in the Southeast, something like that. And so we get asked this every year. Should I apply through OCI? Should I also direct apply? Should I also apply through these other programs? Sure. Should I also reach out to the recruiter, make sure he or she got received my application? Sure. No harm, no foul, as long as you do it properly. Should I also, here's the other one, the other piece. Should I also maybe send my application, my resume to either a contact that I have and or a major partner who's in the department that I'm interested in? Maybe. Maybe, possibly. It doesn't necessarily hurt to do all of those things. Could it help? Sure. I think the only thing that or the main thing that a candidate will want to pay attention to is whether they are competitive for that particular employer. And by that, I mean, typically larger firms have a grade or GP or ranking threshold that they try to stay around, like top 20%. Say they want to interview top 20%. If you're relatively close, or the case can be made that you're relatively close to the ranking that they typically look for, and you've got these other things in your background, say some prior career that lends itself well to this career, sure, the partner over that group, even though they kind of let recruiting handle the initial part of it, they may want to see your application. That attorney that you know who happens to be a friend, they may want to be the person who hands over your application and says, I know it's already in the pile, but I think we should give this person a second look. Then they get the credit for bringing in such a great candidate. So that can be a beautiful thing. And in terms of just sending out, just connecting emails to just confirm that your application was received, things like that. Again, as long as you're doing it in a professional way, then you're probably fine. So I would probably schedule a meeting to strategize those circumstances with your career counselor, just to make sure you're not running afoul of any issues with etiquette, but that you're maximizing the opportunities that you have in the different with the different organizations that you're interested in.
Great. Okay, last outreach question. Okay. But we're connected with some third-party recruiters and headhunters, if you will, all over LinkedIn and things like that. Do you think it's important for law students to build relationships with those third-party recruiters for job movements, maybe post-graduation?
It couldn't hurt, but the short answer is no. Okay. And only because private legal recruiters work for employers who have the money to pay private legal recruiters. Typically, recruiting at the first year associate level is not a challenge that large organizations like that tend to have. Recruiters don't tend to work with students at all, and usually not first years. Usually right after the first year is over, candidates will start getting a lot of phone calls. It's like, I don't know how they know what date you start, but typically at your 1 year mark is when you'll start getting calls. And the reason for that is here. So a private legal recruiter, say the fee structure, this is an example of a fee structure that may be in place. Say they get 25% of the salary that a candidate who's hired by an organization, what their yearly salary will be. So you'll get 25. Say it's 100,000. That recruiter is going to get 25,000. Typically, there's some kind of clause that says the person has to stay there for at least some minimum amount of time. Let's say 6 months, and such that if they leave before then, that recruiter has to give some or all of that money back. And it's so that you're not just trying to place any old person. You're actually trying to find a right fit for both parties. Employers tend to not want to pay that much money for a brand new grad or student, especially when they know you can barely throw a rock without hitting someone who wants a job. Right? Yeah. It's when lawyers get that advanced skill set and they have they've developed a career in a particular thing that an organization is looking for, that these outside private legal recruiting firms are actually hired to find, right? Is to find those folks. That's what's not easy. That's what they don't always have the manpower to do. So employers don't typically want to pay a lot of money when they probably wouldn't have a difficult time finding candidates for what they need anyway. So contacting recruiters now, it like I said, it won't necessarily hurt, but it doesn't necessarily help, because at the time that you even start thinking that you might want to lateral, you can just contact them then and it'll be the same thing. Like seriously, it'll be the same thing. Some recruiter friends that I have even posted on LinkedIn, if you're a student or a first or 1 year out, don't talk to me. Don't contact me. There's just no point in doing it. Not that they don't want to get to know you, because you're awesome, I'm sure. But they don't have, there's not a market for that level of candidate. Once you get a little bit further in your career, when you're thinking about lateraling over, that's when it will matter a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So we were especially excited to have you on today, considering that the Career Development Office here is in charge of all of on-campus interviewing. So we're really excited to talk about that. Could you just walk us through the general steps of the OCI process?
Absolutely. So at our school, we have 4 OCI sessions, and the big one that most students think about when they think OCI is the very first session 1, fall OCI, happens early August. And what we do is, starting with employer recruitment, we advertise the program beginning, I want to say, in about March or April, letting the employers know that they can start registering for the program. And as they register, we populate our online management tool, Simplicity, with their information. We have on our OCI FAQ page for students a breakdown of the important dates and how the process works. And so it starts with the employers getting recruited. At a certain point, we open up the list in Simplicity for students to be able to see which employers have registered and which positions they're looking to hire for. That's called our student review period. So that's where students get a chance to go through, do your research, try to figure out what you are interested in, what you're leaning towards. Hopefully you've had some type of experience during the summer and you're getting a sense of what you like. So by that time where you're reviewing not only the list and the list of employers for OCI and what they list as their the description of their practice, but you go to their websites and you do that additional research. At the end of the student review period, there's what's called the bidding period. That's where the students go into Simplicity, and for each firm of interest, they upload the documents requested by the firm. Typically, at least a resume is requested, sometimes a cover letter, sometimes a transcript, and sometimes a writing sample. These documents are, if they're not asked for then, they may ask for them later. So once students bid, they have up until a certain date where they have the deadline for bidding. Then once all of those bids are in, and bids are applications, right? People ask, do I just upload my documents, or is there something else I need to do? Uploading the documents is all you need to do. You're done in terms of our OCI process. After that date comes, once that deadline is hit, we then, as a department, forward all of the applications to the employers, or they just access their account through Simplicity and they take a look at the applications that have been sent in. Then they decide who all they want to interview, and on a date certain, they send us a list, and the students are able to then view who all they applied to and who selected them to interview with. For the large OCI, we have what we call a pre-select list of students chosen for the first shot at the interview slots. And then we have an alternate list such that if not all of the interview slots were chosen by the pre-selects, alternates get a chance to sign up for whatever interviews are there. We get the question often, if I was chosen as an alternate, should that worry me? Does that mean they're not taking me as seriously? Doesn't mean any of that. It means that your foot is officially in the door. It's up to you to lose it, right? Mm-hmm. So you are being considered just as much as another candidate. Once the students go through and choose their slots to interview with those firms, then the dates for actual on-campus interviews, they're known by everyone. We set those very early. So once you see when your slot is, what was accepted, that's when you know you're going to interview. So everyone makes all of their selections. The students have their interview slots. The employers have the schedules. And then we have 5 days of on-campus interviews. And essentially, we just run the schedule just like the students and the employers have chosen their interview slots. Students can expect to come in their full interview attire with their portfolios and any extra copies of resumes, and expect to spend about 20 minutes or so with the interviewers who were on campus at the time. Typically larger firms, or really just about any employer, if they have an alum in their organization, a law center alum, they try to send them out to interview our students. And that interview is considered a screening interview typically. Okay. It's the just 15 or 20 minute chat with a person to see how we get along, in person, even though you already look great on paper, right? So when I interviewed for my firm, when I would go on campus and do on-campus interviews, I would be thinking, do I like this person? Would I want to work with this person? And also, would ex-partner, ex-senior associate, ex-mid-level associate, would my team also like to work with this person? So they are assessing whether you're a good fit, not just for themselves, but also for the attorneys back at the firm. Once on-campus interviews are completed, part of the process has become having networking events hosted by the firms during OCI, typically in the evening, and some of them overlap. So we've had 4 or 5 in an evening. Oh, wow. And we just help students strategize to get your Uber ready so that you can spend 20 minutes at one and hit all of them, because it is actually part of the interviewing process. They take that very seriously. The more attorneys you get to meet in a larger legal organization, the better off you are, because everyone typically gets a say. Different people's opinions are weighted differently based on how much probably power you have within the firm. But all of that is part of the process. So if you get invited for a callback, that's where you've passed the screening interview, and those attorneys want you to come back and meet more attorneys at the firm. That you can meet anywhere from 1 or 2 additional attorneys to 12. I think the largest callback I had was 12 people, and it was 4 hours, 2 or 3 people each. Oh, wow. 15 or 20 minutes, and then a lunch with like 3 people. You don't always have that many people during a callback, but it's not fairly uncommon to have several back-to-back smaller, like 10 or 15 to 20 minute interviews with several different attorneys at the firm. Sometimes it includes a meal either at the beginning or the end. Maybe it starts with breakfast, maybe it ends with lunch. All of it's the interview process though. Once that is completed, and it could range, like I said, anywhere from just like an hour all the way to 4 hours, then typically you're waiting on a call or an email to say whether the employer would like to extend you an offer. Students should write thank you notes after getting to interview with the attorneys, just to express thanks for their time and reiterate their interest. And at that point, if you get the call for an offer, then that's the process. It's just up to the candidate to accept or decline.
Good deal. And with the direct application process, it's pretty similar, right, aside from that screener part?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, the direct application process could also have a screener. In fact,
Which wouldn't be on campus, I guess.
It may not be on campus. Now, and I say it may not because I would say maybe every other year there are students who, because of direct applications or networking, they gain the interest of an employer who happens to also be interviewing us on campus and with us on campus, and they ask for us to work the student into their interview schedule. That absolutely does happen. So on-campus interviews, the term that we think of in law school, is really just a term for it's convenient for the firm to come on campus and interview. That's really what it is. There are plenty of employers who have just a different process set up, and OCI on the campus of a law school is not the most convenient thing for them. Doesn't mean that it's any different.
Definitely. And you mentioned interview attire earlier. Could you kind of, for our listeners, kind of describe what you mean by that exactly?
Yes, absolutely. So interview attire for a lawyer is considered the lawyer uniform. And what I mean by that is the legal profession is incredibly conservative, and typically you want to be able to show a potential employer that you know the uniform, you know the most conservative version of professional attire that you could possibly have, that where usually you might wear an outfit such as that in court, going to a client visit, especially a client that has maybe been with the firm for a good long time. So it is a matching suit, so a blazer and pants or a skirt that are matching, meaning that they go together, they have the same material, they're made by the same manufacturer or designer. And that, I want to distinguish between that and, say, women will know what this phrase is. Mixed separates. Do y'all have that in men's attire? Okay. Typically, women will mixed separates is where there'll be like a line of clothing, and there'll be some blazers, various shapes, sizes, colors, skirts, various shapes, sizes, colors, pants, right? But you can mix and match them. They don't have to be the same color, the same material, that kind of thing. So women do that all the time. We don't always wear a matching suit with the blazer and the bottoms that come with it. I think men will typically do that, but you can have a sports coat with a different pair. Same kind. Yeah. That's mixed separates, right? So in an interview, a legal interview, the uniform is a matching suit, right? And it is boring is what I'll say. That's what's been said to me numerous times by students. Well, why does it have to be so boring? It's just very, neutral. There's nothing exciting about it. That's really the point, right? So for attorneys, our job is to help others, is to help our clients, typically with very serious matters, and we are known for thinking, for how we think. We receive lots of education, gain lots of experience so that we can tackle very difficult questions, typically when someone has a lot on the line. And if for us to be flashy means that it could be distracting to the issue at hand. The issue at hand should be the client's matter. So if you're distracting with your clothing, then typically people aren't listening to what you have to say as much. And so the uniform, the legal interview uniform is muted. It is basic. It matches so that you don't have to think too hard about it. You should have on a blouse or a shirt in a light color, because the suit needs to be a dark colored suit, and very, I want to say just boring, closed toe, closed heel, shoes, not a lot of jewelry, all very, very basic jewelry. All of this is in order to help an employer, a legal employer specifically, listen to your words. You don't want someone trying to listen and being distracted by your jazzy cufflinks. You don't want them distracted by your red bottoms, quite honestly, because they may be thinking you've got different priorities, right? It's about neutralizing the your physical expression so that they can have a heightened awareness of your verbal expression to understand how you communicate, because that's the bread and butter of what we do. After researching and analyzing and drafting, it's communication. Can you communicate what you need to any number of constituents? And it's up to the candidate to understand that this is the uniform and why. It's also useful for candidates to understand that that's just the interview. That's not daily. Absolutely. I wore suits less often in my New York white shoe, very conservative firm than I do on this job, right? Oh, so it's not like you're going to need to dress like that every single day, but employers need to know that you at least know how.
Sure.
Right? So that's the general uniform.
I think most of the times I saw partners wearing suits over the summer was when interviewees were in the office.
Yeah, exactly right. And part of that, I think, is because they want, just like the candidates want to show respect to the attorneys that they meet, the attorneys want the candidates to know that they respect their time as well, and that's how they do it, right? I show respect partially with the way that I dress, and when you think about it, there are plenty of other professions that have uniforms. When you see someone in a white coat, what do you think? Doctor, right? Absolutely. There's a reason for that, and to go against the grain, sure, it might be fun, but are you going to garner the same, type of respect and have people to understand what you're trying to convey to them, as you would if you're wearing the uniform?
That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. So you talked a little bit about what you would have been looking for when you were doing screener interviews. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit for the callback stage about what the employers are looking for, and then what your tips for success are for our candidates?
Absolutely. So once you've passed the screening interview and you've been invited back, that attorney or those attorneys who recommended for you to come back for the callback, they want you to succeed. Let me just start there. They want you to succeed because their word is on the line a little bit, right? Like they've been entrusted to bring back the candidates that they feel like would be an excellent fit with the organization. So when I am interviewing someone who's come for a callback, I'm going to expect to see the basics, that you present well and in a friendly and professional and poised way, that you're engaging, that you seem to be enjoying yourself. Typically when someone seems to be enjoying themselves, it kind of makes the people in the room enjoy themselves more. I looked for candidates who could just geek out on whatever legal subject that they liked, right? So by that, I mean, like, I love to nerd out on the things that are important to me. And this is the one place during interviews where you can rest assured that that thing that you get really excited about with the law, that subject or the legal issue you were analyzing, where you could talk about it and discuss the intricacies and the rule and how you analyze it and all that, and the people will be enthralled. They want you to enjoy talking about the law. They want you to enjoy analyzing. They want you to enjoy telling any story that is coherent and organized and interesting, right? So we teach the STAR method for when we do our interview training. As you know, we do mock interviews all year round to help candidates prepare for upcoming interviews. One of the things that we harp on is using the STAR method. STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. It's basically the structure for an interview answer. The way IRAC is the structure for analyzing a legal issue in writing, right? So when you use the STAR technique, you are basically bringing to life and putting a story behind some aspect of life that you're telling us about, but the STAR is the show me, don't just tell me, right? So anyone who could take anything on their resume, even if I'm just asking them about an interest, and say they like rescuing puppies, and if when I ask you about that, you're generous with information, you're excited to talk about it, you explain it to me, a person who may know nothing about rescuing animals, and I understand the setup, I understand how one gets into it, then I understand what you are tasked with doing when you rescue a puppy, and then maybe a particular anecdote about how you did it, the things that happened, and then what was the outcome. That's going to stick with me more than you just saying, I rescue puppies and it's really enjoyable and fun and you get a lot from it, right?
Definitely.
At the end of the day, literally at the end of a day of interviewing, I might have interviewed 15 people. I'm looking at their stack of resumes like, which one was this? I can't find. You want to be memorable. The way you do that is bringing to life the information that's on the page here. If you do that, then I'm thinking to myself, I've got an assignment on my desk right now, and I'm swamped with other things. Could I give this assignment to this candidate, have them go off, do whatever they're going to do on it? Then when they come back in my office, are they just going to say, so on that assignment, I found that you can probably do what you were wanting to do. I won't know what you're talking about. You've got to set that situation up for me again, just like you do in the interview, right? So when last we spoke, you pulled me in on the Johnson Velour case, right? You asked me, situation, task. You asked me to research whatever the legal issue is. Here's what I found. Here's what I would recommend be the next steps. Even if you're not talking about the law, that tells me that you can do that. That tells me that I want to work with you. That tells me I'm not going to have to roll my eyes when you walk in my door because I'm going to have to drag the information out of you. Within 2 minutes, I can tell if a student can do that. And then the rest of the time, I'm just having fun, seeing if I like the person, right? So I think the best thing that any candidate can do for themselves in legal interviews is to research themselves, just like they do the employer, and go through their resume and pluck out as many star moments as they can and get comfortable with telling those stories, because that helps the employer to understand how well they'll fit into that environment.
Yeah. STAR method, great for writing your resume too.
Indeed.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. It
Yep.
is. The things that we're trying to understand about what your experience was, it helps you to give words to it. Very often when we do a job, especially for a long time, we are like, I don't know how I do it. I just do it. I mentioned to students sometimes, work like you're training your replacement, right? You can't just say to them, oh, you're going to have to draft some contracts, so here. No, you're going to show them where the contracts are. You're going to show them what you do with them, why you do it. Speaking about that, in that way during interviews is incredibly helpful.
Yeah. So looking back on my own interviewing experiences, I remember feeling strange as a fall 1L, right? You've had one semester of school under your belt, telling firms that I was set on a specific career path.
So sure.
Right?
I know, you were so sure.
When probably, I felt I didn't have nearly, there's no way I could have known,
no way.
right? So is it appropriate to express the hesitation that you don't really know what you want to do at that moment?
It can be. So it's such a conundrum, right? Because most of us will experience something like this. Half the attorneys you meet will say, you don't know what you want to do. You don't know enough, right? The other half will say, well, you should at least have some idea. You should know by now, right? Didn't you do some research before you came? Right. So here's what we recommend. If you have any inkling as to something you might want to do, or at the very least try, then it's okay, and you should state that and also state why. Why did it draw you in? Why did it feel good when you read about it? What was it about it that connected with you? And typically, that additional analysis is what's tough. Students will during interviews just say, I'm really interested in that. And if you ask them why, they're not really sure. So developing that narrative, and it's in your brain, you just have to pull it out, about why you're leaning towards something, why you definitely want to try something. Where you are open to other things, you then also say that, right? I know when I went to law school, very interested in intellectual property, knew that coming in. Had a lot of creatives in my life, my friend and family circle, who had not been paid for work that they had done. And that's one of the things that drew me to law school. I want to work with creative people to help protect their works, to help monetize their works, because of my personal experiences with them. So that's why I know I want to do that, at least try that. But corporate in general seems interesting to me, and I just don't know enough about it to know. Ended up even choosing a firm that allowed me to do a rotation to learn about all the different areas, so that was great. Knew I didn't want to do litigation, however. I didn't say that too loudly. At least not during 1L interviews. By second year interviews, I just didn't choose any firm that was going to force me to do a litigation rotation, right? So, saying all that to say, if you have any idea of what you want to do, state that, be prepared to state why, then also make sure you note that you are open to these other areas, and that pretty much covers all the bases that could be, at play in a situation like that.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
So if we talked sometimes about different types of interviewers, sometimes they just kind of want to get to know you for a while and the conversation is really free flowing. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes, we've gotten questions about fitting a round manhole cover in a square hole in the ground and that kind of thing. And it feels like it's a math test, right? Yes. So if you're in the section where an interviewer isn't asking too many substantive questions, is it okay to try and steer the conversation towards some of your own highlights, or how do you think students should kind of handle those?
It's definitely okay to do that. It's also okay to just kind of go with the flow.
Sure.
Some interviewers already know that you can do the job. They really just want to know if they want to chat with you. Yeah. Right. Most lawyers are spending more time with their colleagues than their families. Right. So very often the reason that they're not asking you many substantive questions is because they know you're smart. You wouldn't have gotten this far if you weren't. Right. So there's not a question of that. It's just, can you just have a normal conversation like a normal human being? So saying all that to say, the flip side of that, however, is when you are interviewing for a larger organization, and we talked about the designated interviewers at different stages, but then the group that also just votes in general on candidates. If as an interviewer, I just want to kick it and I don't want to ask any substantive questions, but then someone else does in the recruiting meeting and I don't have an answer for it, I can't tell them what you think, folks will just make up their own narrative, right? And you don't necessarily want that to always be the case. So I think in order to balance that out, you would want to, if that's something that a candidate is concerned about and they don't want to walk away feeling like it was just a fluff interview where there's just no way the interviewer could have gotten a good sense of who they are, then yes, you can incorporate a few of the things, and here's how. So say you're talking about, they go straight to your skills and interests, and for example, I have that I know how to build air conditioners on my resume. I worked for Trane for years, as did my mother. My father worked for Carrier. We are an air conditioner family. And so I know every job on the line, and I get asked about that every interview. And sometimes interviewers wanted to stay on that layer, right? And that's fine. And so what I'll do is say, I'm talking about the fact that I floated. So I learned all the jobs, and so that way I could float whenever someone was out. I would just take their job, take over their job, and do it and meet their quota, do until they got back. And I really enjoy being essentially a pinch hitter, right? I enjoy being that go-to person who can make happen whatever needs to make happen for the greater good of the team, in order to accomplish the goal. In fact, my last job with my agency, where I was coordinating this program, I was counseling, I was negotiating contracts with assessors, I was negotiating contracts with the Department of Children and Families to get them these assessments that they needed. That was that same kind of energy that I have. Like I was chosen to create and run that program because at my agency, I was known as the person who could fill in to help do anything that was needed, and I would make sure I got it done. So I think I started at Train. I was 17. I'm supervising people who are much older than me, but that basic skill set to be able to jump in, figure things out quickly, and reach a goal among a team or within a team, I think that has just carried me through. But it started with air conditioners.
Wow. Can I hire you? Are we
Absolutely.
hiring? Do you want a job at the podcast?
Absolutely. But yeah, that's how you do it without like saying, well, let me stop talking about this so I can tell you a few things about my credentials, right? You work it in and maybe analogize it to a time in your life where you can show a little bit more of the skill set they're looking for. But ultimately, the whole thing was the skill set they're looking for, right? You're giving them a mental picture of how you can do it in an office and not just a plant where you clock in.
That's
That's
a really important piece
yes.
of advice I got back during one. I was like, phrase every piece of information on your resume as like a skill they're looking for, and how you're showing them that.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
That's exactly right.
So kind of past the interview setting, do you think it's appropriate for students to follow up with email thank yous or even handwritten thank you notes? I've heard
Yes, absolutely. So thank you notes are definitely a thing. You definitely want to do those. Before the pandemic, it was all handwritten. That's the standard. I think some veteran attorneys might even get offended if you didn't handwrite them. Since the pandemic, I mean, I didn't want people handing me stuff, right, during the pandemic. I didn't necessarily want mail coming in. I think email just became a lot more acceptable during the pandemic, and right now I think it's probably still more email than anything, but the handwritten notes are definitely still appreciated with how quickly decisions are made in specifically big law recruiting, because the firms, the similarly situated firms, are typically competing over the same candidates, right? If you send a handwritten thank you note, it's probably not even going to get to them until after they make the decision. So sending emails is definitely fine. I have talked to a few students who just had at the very, very tippity top of their list a firm or an employer who's just their top choice. They want them so bad they can taste it. Then you send an email and then also send a handwritten thank you note, right? It'll be a lovely surprise. You can't go wrong with it, and it's not going to typically make or break a candidacy, but all other things being equal, if there's a candidate that you're neck and neck with, it's just a little icing, little cherry on top, right? It's something very nice that leaves folks with a really positive view of you. But yes, they definitely are still standard and welcomed and appreciated.
Definitely.
But emails.
A lot easier.
It's easy. It's always been easier. It's more acceptable.
Yeah.
By the interviewers these days.
Definitely. So as you said, there's kind of a short timeline for them, some of these more structured, larger
Sometimes.
firms making a decision. Could you speak on kind of that timeline for when they may give an offer and maybe the timeline that the applicant has to make a decision?
Oh, absolutely. So we have different policies in terms of the timeline for offers and deadlines based on the level of students. So for 1Ls, employers need to, for firms with 40 or more attorneys, they need to leave an offer open for at least 2 weeks. For 2Ls, if it's a big law firm like we're talking about, then if they're extending an offer, then the offer needs to be extended until 14 days after the beginning of OCI. That helps where, of course, firms are competitive. They are starting earlier and earlier recruiting. We see more and more often firms giving offers much earlier in the summer with the hopes, and I don't blame them, that students will just not go through OCI, right? Mm-hmm. Don't even talk to anyone else, just choose us, and it can be over. And that's very, very tempting, and a lot of students do that. But there are some students who still want to get a chance to meet as many firms, or at least their top firms, to be able to compare them. And so to protect students, we have that rule in place so that firms aren't preempting the OCI process and then in a almost underhanded kind of way, like taking away a student's choice, right? Because the student doesn't know what they don't know unless they go through OCI, right? Mm-hmm. So typically 2 weeks, either from the date of the offer if they're a 1L, or from the first day of OCI if they're a 2L or a 3L. Now, it varies in terms of how quickly an offer may be extended. It can be anywhere from on the spot, like I go to even just a screening interview, a little 15 minutes, and they're like, here's your offer. Or it could be after callbacks, and then for weeks and sometimes even months after that. So it varies, it ranges greatly. But I would say anywhere from immediately to a couple of months is typically what we see with the bigger law firms. With other employers, it's just going to run the gamut.
Sure. I know I think I've been in a situation where, you interview with one firm, the callback happens really quickly, mm-hmm. the offer gets extended a little bit after that, mm-hmm. and then you still have, screener interview with firm B on day 4.
That's right.
Right? Can it ever be appropriate to ask for an extension on the timeline?
Sure. Absolutely. I was just speaking with a candidate about that today. So, yes is the answer. It's appropriate. It's within etiquette. You should try to request it not as soon as possible, but not as late as possible, right? So you never want to call on the day that it's due, the day your answer is due, and say, could I have an extension? If at all possible, if you can avoid that. When you're asking for an extension, typically the understanding among all parties is that you want the opportunity to just get enough information to compare and make sure you're making the right decision. And there are some firms out there who are very explicit about their support of that process, that when you choose them, they want you to have made an informed decision to do that. Whereas other firms take the tactic, we're not going to give you an extension because it's just so that you could possibly say yes to somebody else. So why would we do that? And we can see both sides.
That's
right?
Fair.
It's absolutely fair. Like, you're either going to say, yes or no to me, or just I'm going to be out of it, right? So yes, it's absolutely appropriate, and but it's also completely appropriate for an employer to say no if they don't want to give you that time. So you want to make sure that when you request it, it's with a large amount of deference and with zero sense of entitlement, because you're not entitled to get that extension. So I would say strategize to request it and get another pair of eyes on either your script for what you plan to say or the email that you plan to send.
Absolutely. So the flip side of that coin is, how do you tell firm B, I already have an offer on the table and I'm interested in continuing this process with you, but I have a timeline?
Oh, I love that. That's the easiest one, I think, of all the different scenarios that could be out there. In fact, some firms will explicitly say to candidates, now we're going through our process. We've interviewed you. We'll be back with an answer soon. But if you get an answer in the meantime, definitely let us know and let us know what the deadline is so that we can, get our stuff together, right? So that is absolutely a thing. Most employers welcome it. Many have already even said explicitly to do it. So even if they haven't said it, what a candidate can do is once they have received an offer from one firm and they have a different firm that they're hoping to receive an offer from, they can email that other firm to say, hi, just want to keep you updated about my status. I have recently received an offer from another employer and I have a deadline of X date to respond. I just wanted to let you know so that you know where I am in the process in general. I would love to know if you can possibly share it or if you know your timeline for making decisions. And I remain very interested in your firm and I look forward to hearing from you. Short and sweet, just giving them the basic information and you're good. Sometimes the firm, I again just spoke with someone this morning, the firm came back and gave them an offer because they provided that information. Have talked to others where the same firm, different candidate, came back and said, we understand you have to make a decision. We're not going to be able to get together in time enough to make our decision. So we totally get it if you have to go ahead and make your decision without hearing back from us. It happens. But yes, that is an appropriate thing that one definitely should do. What I will say, I'll provide an addendum. If the firm that you're thinking might have an offer coming has not come with that offer, but you would not accept, based on what you know, you would not accept their offer over the one you have in hand, there's no reason to reach out and ask them or to even keep them informed of that. You're not going to accept them over the one in hand anyway, right? So I would do it sparingly from that perspective, but otherwise, in general, it's definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah. Sure. Communication is key there.
Absolutely. And you've got to understand that firms, when they get excited about candidates, whether everyone is signed off that needs to sign off or not, and whether the process has just run its course or not, they don't want to lose a good candidate. And what I have even experienced, if we hear from a candidate that has an offer in hand with a deadline, then we will try to reach set X, partner who's been in trial or, get someone else to stand in their stead. We need the answers so that we can go ahead and vote so we don't lose this candidate. Sometimes they'll try to rally and go ahead and make the decision quicker than they might normally. So that's the benefit for you, but it's also a benefit for them so that they won't lose a great candidate.
Absolutely. Well, Dean Tucker, that's all we have for you today.
That's it. This was so fun and fast. Let's do it again every week.
This really has truly been a pleasure. We really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk through these
Absolutely.
issues and explain some things to these younger students.
My pleasure. It's what we do every day. I get to love what I do because I don't have to research this information. It's just in my head. I personally went through it and we see it all the time. I just would encourage any student who's listening just to make sure that you're talking to your career services office and the upperclassmen who know the questions to ask and what they've been through, because it really is essential, especially in a world, if you're a first gen in any kind of way, to understand how to navigate this wild and wonderful world of legal recruiting.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time to share your wisdom.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Emphasis Added is a podcast by the Houston Law Review. If you like what you saw, check us out on YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
Follow us on Instagram @EmphasisAddedPod and check out the Law Review at HoustonLawReview.org.